The porcelain tub was a basin of blood, and the man inside it, the most feared shadow in the city, was trembling. Don Alessandro didn't look like a kingpin. He looked like a broken child, his hand gripping the rim of the tub so hard his knuckles had turned the color of bone. In his other hand, he held a mahogany briefcase. He flipped it open with a shaky thumb. Inside, stacked in neat, suffocating rows, was $500,000 in crisp hundreds. "Wash me," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry earth. "Every drop of red. Get it off. Now." I stood frozen, the steam from the hot water curling around my ankles like a ghost. I was just a girl who needed rent money, a girl who had answered a cryptic cleaning ad in a panic. I didn't know the cleaning involved a man who had just dismantled a rival empire. I didn't know the stain I was scrubbing was the physical memory of a massacre. I dipped the sponge into the water, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. As the water turned pink, Alessandro's eyes locked onto mine. They weren't the cold, calculating eyes of a murderer. They were wide, frantic, and filled with a terror that didn't match the Glock resting on the bath mat. "Wait," he choked out, his breath hitching as I moved the sponge toward a jagged, fresh wound on his shoulder. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was steel, but his skin was ice. 500,000, I whispered, my voice trembling. That was the deal. I clean you, I leave, and I never speak your name. He looked at the money. Then he looked at the blood swirling down the drain, the blood of his brother, I would later find out. Suddenly, he shoved the briefcase off the edge of the tub. The money scattered across the wet tile like fallen leaves, soaking in the pink overflow. "No," he gasped, his forehead dropping against my arm. He started to sob, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl with a mix of pity and pure, unadulterated dread. "It's too much. The price. It's too high." "The money?" I asked, confused. "No," he begged, his eyes searching mine with a desperate, haunting lucidity. "The soul. Please, go lower. Strip the layers back. Don't just wash the skin. Go deeper. Find the man I was before tonight. I'll give you everything, but please, go lower." He wasn't talking about the price of the job. He was talking about the depth of his sins. And as the door behind me clicked locked from the outside, I realized I wasn't just there to wash his body. I was there to drown with him. Before I tell you how I ended up standing in a crime lord's bathroom, watching $500,000 soak in his brother's blood, I need you to do something for me. Drop where you're watching this from in the comments right now. Let me see where this story is reaching tonight. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button immediately. You're going to want to be here for what comes next. My name is Mireille Fontaine. I was 24 years old, and I had exactly $47 to my name when I saw the ad that would change everything. $47, a overdue rent notice pinned to my apartment door, and a grandmother in a nursing home whose care I couldn't afford to lose. 3 weeks before that night in Alessandro's bathroom, I was a different person. Or maybe I was the same person, just wearing a thicker mask. I worked 2 jobs, one at a dry cleaner on 7th Street, pressing shirts for men who never looked at my face, and another at a late-night diner where the tips were as scarce as the hope that hung in the air. Every dollar I made went somewhere. The nursing home. The landlord. The electricity company. There was never anything left for me, not even enough to buy a proper winter coat as the November winds began their assault on the city. My mother had died when I was 17. Cancer. The kind that takes its time, that lets you watch someone you love become a stranger in their own body. My father had left long before that, a ghost who chose to haunt someone else's life instead of ours. That left just me and my grandmother, Rosalind, a woman who had raised me on lullabies and lavender tea, who had taught me that dignity was something no one could take from you unless you handed it over. But dignity doesn't pay medical bills. Dignity doesn't keep the lights on or the eviction notices at bay. So when I saw the ad, printed on cream-colored paper, pinned to the community board at the laundromat, something inside me shifted. The text was simple, almost elegant in its brevity: discreet cleaning service needed. One night. Payment, negotiable. Only the desperate need apply. Only the desperate need apply. I should have seen those words for what they were: a warning, a red flag waving in a hurricane. But desperation has a way of blinding you to danger. When you're drowning, you don't question the hand that reaches down to pull you up. You just grab it and pray it doesn't push you deeper. I tore the paper from the board and dialed the number before I could talk myself out of it. The voice that answered was female, low, and smooth like honey poured over gravel. She didn't ask for my qualifications. She didn't ask for references. She asked only one question: how much do you need to disappear? I didn't understand what she meant. I told her I needed rent money. I told her I needed enough to cover my grandmother's care for the next 3 months. I gave her a number that felt astronomical at the time: $15,000. She laughed. Not cruelly, but with something that sounded almost like pity. "You'll get more than that," she said. "But understand this: what you see, you forget. What you touch, you never speak of. The money will be enough to change your life, but only if you're willing to change with it." I agreed. Of course I agreed. What choice did I have? The car came for me at midnight on a Tuesday. Black. Tinted windows so dark I couldn't see my own reflection. The driver didn't speak, didn't even turn to acknowledge me as I slid into the back seat. We drove for what felt like hours, though when I checked my phone, only 40 minutes had passed. The city fell away behind us, replaced by winding roads and estates hidden behind iron gates and ancient trees. The house, if you could call it a house, was a monument to power. Stone walls that seemed to stretch into the clouds. Windows that glowed with warm light but somehow still felt cold. Gardens that were immaculate in a way that spoke of money, of staff, of a world so far removed from mine that it might as well have been another planet. I was led inside by a woman in her 50s, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes holding a weight that told me she had seen things she would never speak of. Her name, I would learn later, was Renata. She was Alessandro's keeper, his protector, the woman who had watched him grow from a boy into a monster and somehow loved him still. "The bathroom is upstairs," she said, her accent thick and old-world. "Third door on the left. You will wait inside. Do not touch anything. Do not look at anything too closely. When he comes, you will do what he asks. Nothing more. Nothing less." "What exactly am I cleaning?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Renata stopped walking. She turned to look at me, and for a moment, something flickered across her face: regret, perhaps, or a warning she couldn't put into words. "Whatever he needs you to clean," she said finally. "Tonight, that burden may be heavier than you expect." She left me at the bathroom door. I pushed it open and stepped inside, and that's when I saw it, the tub, already half filled with steaming water. The medical supplies laid out on the counter like instruments of surgery. The bottles of antiseptic, the gauze, the needles, and thread for stitches. This wasn't a cleaning job. This was triage. This was aftermath. I should have run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to flee down those marble hallways and never look back. But then I thought of my grandmother. I thought of the eviction notice. I thought of the way the nursing home administrator had looked at me the last time I was late with a payment, like I was already failing, already giving up. So I stayed. I sat on the edge of the cold, pristine counter and waited. I didn't have to wait long. The door burst open 30 minutes later, and with it came chaos. Alessandro stumbled through first, his white shirt soaked crimson, his face a mask of something I couldn't name. Behind him came two men carrying another body, a man who looked so much like Alessandro that for a moment I thought I was seeing double. But this man's eyes were closed. This man's chest wasn't moving. This man was dead. "Get him out," Alessandro snarled, his voice raw with something that wasn't anger. "Get him out of here. I don't want to see him. I don't want to." He stopped. His eyes found me, and for a single, suspended moment everything went still. "Who is this?" he demanded. "The cleaner," one of the men said. "Renata brought her." "You requested." "I know what I requested." Alessandro's voice cracked. He braced himself against the doorframe, and I watched his legs nearly give out beneath him. The man who was supposed to be the most dangerous person in the city looked like he was one breath away from shattering. The men took the body away. I heard their footsteps retreating down the hall, heard doors opening and closing, heard the distant rumble of an engine as a car pulled away. And then it was just us, me and Alessandro, the bathroom suddenly feeling as small as a coffin. He walked toward the tub. Each step seemed to cost him something: energy, resolve, whatever was left of the wall he'd built around himself. He began unbuttoning his shirt with fingers that shook so badly he could barely manage the task. "Help me," he said. Not a command. A plea. I moved without thinking. I undid the remaining buttons, peeled the blood-soaked fabric from his shoulders, tried not to gasp at the wound I found there, a deep gash that spoke of a blade, of close combat, of someone getting near enough to Alessandro to hurt him. Which meant someone had gotten near enough to kill. He lowered himself into the water, and I watched the clear liquid transform into something else entirely. Pink at first. Then deeper. Redder. The color of everything he had done and everything he could never undo. That's when he opened the briefcase. That's when he showed me the money. That's when he whispered those words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Wash me. Every drop of red. Get it off. Now." And God help me, I picked up the sponge and began. The water had gone cold twice before Alessandro spoke again. Each time, Renata appeared like a shadow, draining the tub, refilling it with fresh heat, her eyes never meeting mine, her hands moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. How many times, I wondered. How many bodies had been washed in this bathroom? How many sins had swirled down that drain? I scrubbed until my arms ached, until the sponge began to fray at the edges. The blood came off his skin in layers, some fresh and bright, some already drying into rust-colored maps of violence. But there was always more. In the creases of his palms. Behind his ears. Beneath fingernails that had clearly clawed at something, at someone. "You're wondering who he was," Alessandro said finally. His voice had changed. The raw desperation from before had settled into something flatter, more hollow. "The man they carried out." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I was allowed to. "My brother," he continued anyway. "Enzo. My younger brother. 29 years old." Dead by my hands. The sponge slipped from my fingers and sank into the pink water. I didn't reach for it. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at this man who had just confessed to fratricide like he was discussing the weather. He betrayed me. Alessandro's jaw tightened. A muscle twitched beneath his eye. He sold information to the Vittorio family. Locations. Shipment schedules. Names of men who trusted me with their lives. 14 of them are dead now because my brother needed money to feed a gambling addiction I didn't know he had. I don't, my voice came out as a whisper. I don't need to know this. No, he agreed. You don't. But I need to say it. I need someone to hear it who isn't already part of this world. Someone who can still be horrified. Someone who can still look at me like I'm a monster, because everyone else in this house has forgotten how. He reached into the water and retrieved the sponge himself. He held it out to me, his hand surprisingly steady now that the initial shock had passed. Keep going, he said. Please. I took the sponge. I kept going. As I worked, he told me things. Not because I asked, I wouldn't have dared, but because the dam had broken and the flood couldn't be stopped. He told me about his father, Dominic Carvalho, who had built the empire from nothing, who had started as a dock worker and ended as the man who controlled half the city's imports. He told me about his mother, a woman named Serafina who had died giving birth to Enzo, whose absence had created a hole in the family that nothing could fill. My father blamed Enzo without ever saying it, Alessandro said. He looked at him and saw the price of his birth. I tried to make up for it. I loved my brother twice as hard, thinking I could give him enough love for both of us. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. I moved the sponge across his chest, careful to avoid the wound on his shoulder. Renata had stitched it closed earlier, her needle moving with practiced precision, but it still looked angry and raw. He came to me 3 months ago, Alessandro continued. Crying. Terrified. Said he owed money to the wrong people, that they were going to kill him if he didn't pay. I gave him the money. $200,000. I didn't ask questions. I didn't lecture him. I just handed it over because he was my brother, and that's what you do for blood. But he didn't stop gambling. No. He didn't stop anything. Alessandro's eyes drifted closed. He took my mercy and used it as proof that I was weak. He sold that weakness to my enemies. And 3 weeks later, 14 of my men were dead in a warehouse on the east side, and the Vittorio family was laughing at my name. The bathroom fell silent except for the gentle sound of water moving, of the sponge dragging across skin that was finally beginning to look clean. I thought he was done talking. I hoped he was done talking. Because every word he spoke made me more complicit, more entangled in a world I had no business being part of. But Alessandro wasn't finished. Do you know what the worst part is? He asked, opening his eyes to look directly at me. I gave him a chance. Tonight, when I confronted him, I gave him one chance to explain. One chance to tell me it wasn't true, that there was some other explanation, that my little brother hadn't sold my people to their deaths for gambling money. What did he say? Alessandro's face twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite a grimace. He said he did it because he was tired of living in my shadow. He said I had taken everything, the empire, the respect, our father's love, and left nothing for him. He said if he couldn't have power, he would burn down everything I'd built until we were both standing in the ashes. So you killed him. So I killed him. The words came out flat. Dead. I put my hands around my brother's throat, and I squeezed until he stopped breathing. And now his blood is in this water, on my skin, and I can't make it clean. No matter how much you scrub. No matter how much I pay. I can still feel him fighting. I can still hear him gasping. I can still see his eyes. He trailed off, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The water was almost clear now. The blood was mostly gone. But I understood what he'd meant when he begged me to go lower. The stain he wanted removed wasn't on his skin. It was somewhere much deeper, somewhere no sponge could reach. Why me? I asked finally. Why bring in a stranger for this? Alessandro's laugh was hollow. Because the people in my world don't see what I've become. They see Don Carvalho, heir to an empire, a man to be feared and obeyed. They don't see the boy who used to sneak into his brother's room during thunderstorms because Enzo was afraid of the noise. They don't see the monster I turned into to survive in this life. But you, he paused, studying my face with an intensity that made me want to look away. You see it all. And you're still here. I'm here because of the money. Are you? He tilted his head. $500,000 is scattered across that floor, soaking in blood. You could have grabbed it and run the moment I broke down. You could have called the police. You could have done 100 different things. But you're still here, still cleaning, still listening. Why? I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, but it was too complicated, too wrapped up in things I didn't understand. Pity. Horror. A strange, inexplicable sense that this man, this murderer, this monster, was also somehow a victim of something larger than himself. I'm going to get out now, Alessandro said, and his voice had shifted again, becoming more controlled, more like the crime lord he was supposed to be. Renata will bring you dry clothes. She'll give you the money, more than what's on the floor, since most of that is ruined now. And then you'll leave. You'll go back to your life, and you'll forget this ever happened. And if I can't forget? He was silent for a moment. Then he reached up and touched my face, just the barest brush of fingers against my cheek, so light I might have imagined it. Then I'll pray for both of us, he said. Because once you've seen this world, it doesn't let you go easily. I helped him stand, averting my eyes as he reached for the towel Renata had left on the warming rack. The vulnerability of earlier had been replaced by something harder, a shell reconstructing itself in real time. By the time he wrapped the towel around his waist, he looked almost like the man in the stories, the Don, the Shadow King, the one whose name made men cross themselves and women clutch their pearls. Almost. But not quite. I had seen behind the mask. I had watched him sob against my arm. That wasn't something either of us could pretend hadn't happened. Renata appeared in the doorway as if summoned by instinct. She took one look at Alessandro, one look at me, and something shifted in her expression, a softening I hadn't expected. The car is ready, she said to Alessandro. But perhaps the girl should stay tonight. It's late. The roads are dangerous. The roads are always dangerous, Alessandro replied. But he looked at me, and I saw the question in his eyes. The choice he was offering without saying the words. Stay. See more. Become more entangled in this web. Or go. Take the money. Try to forget. I should have chosen to leave. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to take the cash and run as far as my legs could carry me. But rationality had abandoned me somewhere between seeing that blood-filled tub and listening to a killer confess his sins. I'll stay, I heard myself say. Just for tonight. Alessandro nodded once, sharply, as if he had expected nothing less. Renata, prepare a room for her. Something in the east wing, away from. He trailed off, but we all knew what he meant. Away from wherever they had taken his brother's body. As Renata led me out of the bathroom, I glanced back one last time. Alessandro stood alone in the middle of that white marble room, surrounded by scattered money and fading bloodstains, looking like the loneliest man in the world. And somehow, inexplicably, I felt like I was the only one who could see it. The room Renata gave me was larger than my entire apartment. The bed could have fit 4 people comfortably, draped in silks that probably cost more than my annual salary. I should have slept. My body was exhausted, every muscle aching from the tension of the night. But my mind wouldn't quiet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blood. I saw Alessandro's face twisted in anguish. I saw the body of his brother being carried away. So instead of sleeping, I stood at the window and watched the sunrise paint the grounds in shades of gold and amber. The estate was even more massive than I had realized, sprawling gardens, a hedge maze, what looked like stables in the distance. All of it maintained with military precision, not a single blade of grass out of place. This was the world of the impossibly wealthy. The world where men could kill their brothers and throw away $500,000 in the same breath. The world I had stumbled into by answering an ad on a laundromat bulletin board. A knock at the door made me jump. I expected Renata, coming to escort me out with my payment. Instead, when I opened the door, I found Alessandro. He looked different in the morning light. The wild desperation of the night before had been replaced by something more controlled, more contained. He wore a fresh suit, dark gray, perfectly tailored, and his hair was slicked back in a way that made him look severe and commanding. But there were shadows under his eyes that no amount of composure could hide. "You're still here," he said. "Not a question. You asked me to stay." "No. I gave you the option. There's a difference." He stepped into the room without waiting for an invitation, walking to the window I had just abandoned. He looked out at the grounds with an expression I couldn't read. Most people, given the option, would have fled in the night. Taken whatever money they could find and disappeared. I'm not most people. No. He turned to face me. I'm beginning to understand that. We stood in silence for a moment, the space between us charged with something neither of us was acknowledging. Then Alessandro reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope, thick, heavy, unmistakably full of cash. $1 million, he said, holding it out to me. For your silence. For your discretion. And for something else, if you're willing. I didn't take the envelope. What else? I need someone. His voice was careful, measured. Not a cleaner. Not a servant. Someone who can see what others miss. Someone who isn't already corrupted by this world. Last night, you looked at me like I was a human being, even after everything you saw. Do you know how rare that is in my life? I don't understand what you're asking. Stay. Not as an employee, as something more. An advisor. A confidant. Someone who can tell me when I'm becoming the monster everyone already believes I am. He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face before he suppressed it. I killed my brother last night. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know who I'm becoming. And if I don't find someone to anchor me to whatever humanity I have left, I'm afraid I'll lose it entirely. The offer was insane. It was dangerous. It was an invitation to embed myself in a world of violence and death, to become complicit in things that would haunt me forever. And yet, when I looked at Alessandro Carvalho, I didn't just see a crime lord. I saw a man unraveling at the seams, reaching out for something to hold on to. I saw someone who had been born into a life they hadn't chosen, shaped by forces beyond their control into something they never wanted to become. Before I answer what came next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where every logical part of your brain was telling you to walk away, but something deeper, something you couldn't name, kept you rooted in place? What would you have done in that moment? Would you have taken the money and left, preserving your own safety? Or would you have stayed, drawn by something inexplicable, something that felt like fate? Tell me in the comments what you think you would have chosen, and why. I'm curious to hear your perspectives. I took the envelope. Not because of the money, though the weight of it in my hand reminded me of every bill I couldn't pay, every debt that had been crushing me, but because of the look in his eyes. The desperate hope. The certainty that my answer was the difference between salvation and damnation. I'll stay, I said. But I have conditions. Alessandro's eyebrow rose. Conditions? I'm not your employee. I'm not your servant. I'm not your anything, not in the way your people will assume. If I'm going to help you stay human, I need to be treated as an equal, not an accessory. Done. I need my grandmother taken care of. Her nursing home bills, her medical expenses, everything. For the rest of her life, no matter how long that is. Done. And I need to know the truth. All of it. Not just what you choose to tell me. If there are secrets that could get me killed, I need to know about them before I'm standing in the crosshairs. Alessandro was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. The truth, he said. All of it. I can give you that. But I warn you, Mireille, the truth in my world is rarely kind. Once you know it, there's no unknowing. There's no going back to the person you were before. I think that person already died last night, I replied. Somewhere between the blood and the bathtub. Whoever I am now will have to be built from scratch. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition, the understanding that he was speaking to someone who comprehended loss and transformation in ways most people never would. Then let me tell you about the Vittorio family, he said, gesturing for me to sit. And about why everything that happened last night was only the beginning. The story he told me over the next 2 hours made the previous night look like a prologue. The Vittorio family had ruled the southern territories for 3 generations, a rival dynasty that had been at war with the Carvalhos since before Alessandro was born. The current head of the family was a man named Salvatore Vittorio, a 70-year-old patriarch who had killed his way to the top and maintained his position through a combination of brutality and cunning. But Salvatore was dying. Cancer, like my mother. And his death was creating a power vacuum that everyone wanted to fill. He has 3 sons, Alessandro explained, pacing the room as he spoke. Gianluca, the eldest, who is brilliant but cruel. Benedetto, the middle child, who is weak but well-connected. And Rocco, the youngest, who is unpredictable in ways that make even my people nervous. They're already circling each other like wolves, waiting for their father to take his last breath so they can tear the empire apart. What does this have to do with your brother? Alessandro stopped pacing. Enzo was selling information to Gianluca. Not Salvatore, Gianluca. He was building an alliance, positioning himself to take my place if and when Gianluca made his move. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was finally stepping out of my shadow. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He didn't understand that Gianluca was using him. That the moment my brother stopped being useful, he would have been discarded like garbage. So killing him was a mercy, in a way. A faster death than what Gianluca had planned. Alessandro's voice was bitter. That's what I tell myself, anyway. That's the lie that lets me sleep at night. The pieces were starting to come together in my mind, a picture more complex and more terrifying than I had imagined. This wasn't just about one night of violence. This was about an imminent war, a struggle for control of an empire that spanned the entire city and beyond. And somehow, impossibly, I had just agreed to stand in the middle of it. There's more, Alessandro said, his voice dropping lower. Something I haven't told anyone. Not even Renata. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a photograph. It was old, creased from being handled too many times, the colors faded with age. I looked at it and felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. The photograph showed a woman. She had my eyes. My jawline. My mother's smile. Who is this? I whispered, though somewhere deep inside, I already knew. Her name was Colette Fontaine, Alessandro said. She died 24 years ago. She was my father's mistress before he met my mother, and she was pregnant when he ended things with her. He met my eyes, and his gaze held a weight that made my chest tight. The child she was carrying was a girl. That girl was you, Mireille. My father was your father too. The room spun. My lungs forgot how to work. That's impossible, I managed. My father, my mother's husband, he left when I was a baby. He was a dock worker. He was nobody. The dock worker was a cover. A man your mother married to give you legitimacy, paid by my father to disappear when you were old enough not to remember him. Your real father was Dominic Carvalho. Which means, Alessandro's voice caught, and I saw something flash across his face. Horror. Recognition. The same dizzying realization I was experiencing. Which means you're my sister. And the man I killed last night, Enzo, he wasn't just my brother. He was yours too. I don't remember falling. I don't remember Alessandro catching me. I only remember coming back to consciousness on the silk-covered bed, Renata pressing a cold cloth to my forehead, her eyes filled with a concern that seemed almost maternal. Breathe, child, she murmured. Just breathe. I couldn't. Every inhale felt like swallowing glass. My entire life, everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, my history, had been a lie. A carefully constructed fiction designed to keep me away from a world that had still managed to drag me back in. How long have you known? I asked Alessandro, who stood in the corner of the room like a specter, his face carved from stone. I suspected when I first saw you, he admitted. You looked too much like our father to be a coincidence. But I didn't know for certain until I had my people run your background. Your mother's marriage certificate. The timing of your birth. The payments my father made to your supposed father for years after he left. He paused. I confronted Enzo about it, actually. The night before he died. I asked him if he knew we had a sister he'd never met. Do you know what he said? I shook my head. He said he'd known for years. He said our father had told him everything before he died, had made him promise to keep you hidden, to keep you safe from this life. And instead of honoring that promise, Enzo used the information as leverage. He threatened to expose you, to drag you into the world you were never supposed to be part of, unless I gave him more money, more power, more of everything he thought he deserved. The betrayal hit me in waves. A brother I'd never known had known about me for years. Had held my existence over Alessandro's head like a weapon. Had valued his own greed over my safety, my anonymity, my entire life. "That's why you really killed him," I said, the realization crystallizing. "Not just because he betrayed your organization. Because he threatened to destroy me." Alessandro didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was rough. I told myself it was about the 14 men who died. I told myself it was about honor and loyalty and all the things a Don is supposed to care about. But when he spoke your name, when he described how he would drag you into this world and use you against me, something snapped. Something beyond reason. "You protected me. Without even knowing me. You're my blood." He said it simply, as if that explained everything. And maybe, in his world, it did. Renata helped me sit up, pressing a glass of water into my shaking hands. The cold liquid helped ground me, gave me something physical to focus on while my mind continued to reel. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now, everything changes." Alessandro moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed with a careful distance between us. "The Vittorio family doesn't know about you. No one does, except the people in this room. But that won't last. Information always finds a way to leak, especially information this valuable." "Valuable?" "You're the lost Carvalho heir. The daughter Dominic hid from the world. If Gianluca or any of his brothers discovered you existed, they would use you as a pawn in their war against me. Kidnap you. Ransom you. Marry you off to one of their allies to legitimize their claim to our territories." His jaw tightened. "I won't let that happen. I can take care of myself." "Against the kind of people who are coming?" He shook his head. "No, Mireille. You can't. No one can, not alone. That's why you need to stay here, where I can protect you. Where we can protect each other." The irony wasn't lost on me. I had come here to clean blood for money, and now I was being told I was royalty in an empire built on blood. The girl who couldn't pay her rent was apparently the heir to a fortune so vast it made the scattered money on the bathroom floor look like pocket change. "I need time," I said. "To process this. To decide what I want." "You have until tomorrow night." Alessandro's voice was apologetic but firm. "Gianluca is making his move. Salvatore is on his deathbed, hours away from death, according to our sources. Once he's gone, the war begins in earnest. And I need to know if you're standing with me or if I need to get you somewhere far away from here." He left me alone with Renata, who fussed over me like a grandmother would, bringing food I couldn't taste, asking questions I couldn't answer. Eventually, she seemed to understand that I needed solitude more than care, and she retreated to the hallway, leaving me to wrestle with the impossible weight of my new reality. I spent the day wandering the estate. The guards who had been invisible the night before were everywhere now, watching me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Word had clearly spread that I was someone important, though I doubted any of them knew exactly who or why. I found myself in the garden as the sun began to set, sitting on a stone bench near a fountain that depicted angels at war. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Angels. War. The beautiful and the terrible, intertwined. "You have her eyes." The voice came from behind me. I turned to find a man I didn't recognize, tall, silver-haired, with a face that had been handsome once but was now carved with the lines of age and cruelty. He walked with a cane, each step deliberate and painful, and his clothes were simple in a way that screamed wealth more loudly than any designer suit could. "Colette," he continued, lowering himself onto the bench beside me with a grunt. "Your mother. I loved her, you know. More than my wife. More than anything, really. But love isn't enough in this world. Power is. Survival is." And Colette understood that, even if it broke her heart. "Who are you?" The man smiled, and the expression didn't reach his eyes. "I'm the reason your brother is dead. The reason you're here. The reason everything is falling apart." My blood ran cold. Salvatore Vittorio. In the flesh. What's left of it, anyway? He gestured at his own frail body with something like contempt. "Cancer is taking its time with me. Giving me just enough strength to watch my sons tear themselves apart fighting over my corpse." "How did you get in here?" "Alessandro's guards." "Alessandro's guards are loyal, but loyalty can be bought. Or replaced." Salvatore's smile widened. "I didn't come to hurt you, child. I came to offer you something your half-brother never will." "And what's that?" "The truth about how your mother really died." Everything inside me went still. My mother had died of cancer. That's what I'd been told my entire life. That's what the medical records showed. That's what I'd believed for 7 years. "She was sick," I said, but my voice wavered. "It was cancer." "Yes, she was sick. But she didn't die of cancer, Mireille. She was murdered." Salvatore leaned closer, and I could smell death on him, the sweet, rotting scent of a body that was already halfway to the grave. Poisoned by someone in the Carvalho household. Someone who didn't want her telling you the truth about your father. Someone who was afraid of what you might become if you ever learned who you really were. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Ask Alessandro about the flowers that arrived at your mother's hospital room. White lilies, her favorite. Ask him who sent them. Ask him who knew she was dying and wanted to make sure she died quickly, before she could tell you anything." Salvatore rose to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. "Your brother thinks he saved you last night by killing Enzo. But Enzo wasn't the only Carvalho with secrets. And the one who killed your mother is still very much alive." He walked away before I could respond, disappearing into the gathering darkness like he had never been there at all. I confronted Alessandro that same night. Found him in his study, surrounded by maps and documents and photographs of men I didn't recognize, and I asked him about the flowers. About the lilies. About everything Salvatore had told me. His face went pale. "How do you know about that?" "It doesn't matter how I know. I need to know if it's true." Alessandro was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "The lilies were sent by Renata. On orders from my father." The words hit me like a physical blow. Renata. The woman who had tended to me so gently. The woman who had pressed cloths to my forehead and brought me food and looked at me with such concern. Why? Because my father was a monster. Alessandro's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He kept your mother a secret for years. Supported her financially. Made sure she wanted for nothing. But when she started getting sick, when she started talking about reaching out to you, about telling you the truth, he panicked. He was dying himself, and he was terrified that the revelation would destabilize everything he'd built. So he killed her. He had her killed. There's a difference. No, there isn't. Alessandro flinched, and I saw the truth in his eyes. He agreed with me. He knew his father's sins as well as his own, and he carried them like chains he could never break free from. Renata was following orders, he said quietly. She didn't want to do it. She fought my father for weeks, tried to convince him there was another way. But in the end, she obeyed because that's what she's always done. That's who she is, the person who carries out the orders no one else has the stomach for. She murdered my mother. She ended her suffering. The cancer was going to kill her within weeks regardless. What Renata did, he stopped, ran a hand over his face. I'm not defending it. I'm not excusing it. I'm just telling you what I know. I thought of Renata's kind eyes. Her gentle hands. The way she had tended to Alessandro after his worst moment with such practiced care. She was a killer. She was a mercy giver. She was both and neither, existing in a moral gray zone that this world seemed to specialize in. I want to talk to her, I said. Mireille. I want to talk to her. Now. Renata was waiting for us in the kitchen, as if she had known this moment would come. She sat at the long wooden table with her hands folded in front of her, her face a mask of resigned calm. You know, she said as I entered. It wasn't a question. Yes. And you want answers. I want the truth. The real truth, not the version Alessandro tells himself to sleep at night. Renata was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded slowly and began to speak. Your mother was a remarkable woman. Beautiful. Kind. Fierce in ways that made Dominic terrified and fascinated in equal measure. He met her before his marriage was arranged. Before any of this, she gestured vaguely at the opulent kitchen surrounding us. Before any of this mattered. They loved each other. Genuinely, truly loved each other. But Dominic was the heir to an empire, and empire doesn't care about love. It cares about alliances. About blood. About power. So he married someone else. So he married Serafina, whose family controlled the southern ports. And he kept Colette as his secret, visiting her when he could, supporting her from a distance, loving her in the only way his world would allow. Renata's eyes grew distant. When she became pregnant with you, he wanted to acknowledge you publicly. It was Serafina who refused. She was carrying Enzo at the time, and she couldn't bear the scandal of her husband's illegitimate child being announced alongside her own pregnancy. So you were hidden. Sent away. Given a false father and a false history. And when my mother got sick. Renata's composure cracked, just slightly. A tremble in her lower lip. A brightness in her eyes that might have been tears. She wanted to tell you everything. She was dying, and she couldn't bear the thought of you never knowing where you came from. She called Dominic and told him she was going to contact you, to explain everything before it was too late. And he killed her for it. He killed her because he was a coward. Renata's voice was suddenly fierce. Because he had spent his entire life building walls around his secrets, and he couldn't bear to watch them come down. Because he loved her, truly loved her, and he couldn't stand the thought of her last weeks being spent on a revelation that would only cause pain. That wasn't his choice to make. No. It wasn't. Renata met my eyes. I administered the poison myself. It was quick. Painless. She fell asleep and never woke up. I told myself it was mercy. I told myself I was ending her suffering. But the truth is, I was following orders, just like I always have. And there's no mercy in that. There's only obedience. The room fell silent. I felt tears burning in my eyes, tears of rage, of grief, of something I couldn't name. My mother's death had been stolen from her. Her final moments of agency, her chance to tell me the truth, had been taken by a man who claimed to love her and a woman who claimed to care. "Why are you still here?" I asked finally. "After everything you've done?" Renata's smile was sad. "Because someone has to remember them. The people we've killed. The sins we've committed. Alessandro would forget, given the chance. He would bury the past and move forward, because that's how survivors survive. But I remember every face. Every name. Every last breath. I stay because I owe them that much, to carry the weight of what we've done." I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I couldn't look at her anymore. Couldn't look at Alessandro, who had followed me and stood in the doorway with anguish written across his face. But I didn't leave the estate. I didn't run. Because somewhere between the rage and the grief, I realized something important. These people, this family I hadn't known I was part of, were monsters. But they were my monsters. And if I was going to survive in this world, if I was going to honor my mother's memory and protect myself from the forces that wanted to use me, I couldn't do it alone. The war was coming. Salvatore was dying. Gianluca and his brothers were circling like vultures, waiting for their moment to strike. And I had just discovered that I was a weapon neither side knew how to wield. I found Alessandro in his study again an hour later. He looked like he had aged a decade since our last conversation, his face drawn and exhausted. "I'm staying," I said without preamble. "Not because I forgive you. Not because I forgive Renata. But because Salvatore Vittorio came to me today and tried to turn me against you, and I won't be a pawn in his game. I won't be a pawn in anyone's game." Alessandro looked up, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something like hope in his eyes. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want the Empire." The words came out before I fully realized what I was saying. "Not all of it. I'm not qualified to run a criminal organization. But I want a seat at the table. A voice in decisions. The power to protect myself and the people I care about. Done. I want Renata to answer to me. Not as a servant, as a penitent. She took my mother from me. She can spend the rest of her life trying to make that right." Alessandro hesitated, but only briefly. "Done. And I want Gianluca Vittorio dead." My voice was cold and steady, and I barely recognized myself. "He used my brother. He orchestrated a massacre. He's the reason Enzo became the monster he was. When this war ends, I want to be the one who kills him." Alessandro's eyebrow rose. "That's not something I can simply give you. Gianluca is the most dangerous man in the Vittorio family. Killing him would require training, resources, opportunity. I know." I met his eyes. "I have time. Not much, but some. Teach me. Make me into something Gianluca won't see coming. And when the moment arrives, let me be the one to end him." For a long moment, Alessandro just looked at me. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, not the cold, calculated smile of a crime lord, but something warmer, something almost brotherly. "You really are our father's daughter," he said. "God help us all." The war lasted 7 months. 7 months of strategy and violence, of alliances forged and broken, of blood spilled on both sides until the streets themselves seemed to run red. I trained every day during that time: combat, weapons, tactics. I learned to move like a shadow, to strike like lightning, to think 3 moves ahead of any opponent. Renata trained me personally. It was her penance, she said, teaching me to protect myself the way she had failed to protect my mother. There were days I hated her so intensely I could barely look at her. And there were days I understood, with a clarity that frightened me, that she was a woman who had been shaped by the same forces that were now shaping me. Alessandro and I grew closer than either of us expected. He was patient with my rage, with my grief, with my endless questions about a family I'd never known. He told me stories about our father, the good and the bad, the moments of tenderness and the acts of brutality. He told me about Enzo, the brother I'd never meet, the man who had loved and betrayed and died in the same breath. And slowly, something shifted between us. Not just siblinghood, though there was that. But partnership. Trust. A bond forged in shared blood and shared purpose. Salvatore Vittorio died 3 weeks after our first meeting. His death was slow and painful, exactly as he deserved. His sons turned on each other almost immediately. Benedetto, the weak middle child, was dead within days, killed by Rocco in a power grab that backfired spectacularly. Rocco was captured by our people a month later, and I was there when Alessandro made him answer for the 14 men who had died in the warehouse massacre. That left Gianluca. He was the last. The most dangerous. The mastermind behind everything that had destroyed my family. I found him in a villa on the coast, surrounded by the remnants of his guard. Alessandro's forces had whittled them down to nothing over the months, but Gianluca himself had remained elusive, always one step ahead, always escaping just before the trap closed. Not this time. I went in alone. It was foolish. Alessandro tried to stop me. Renata begged me to reconsider, but this was something I needed to do myself. Gianluca had used my brother. He had orchestrated the betrayal that had led to Enzo's death. He had built his entire strategy around turning the Carvalhos against each other. And now he was going to face the Carvalho he had never known about. The villa was quiet when I entered. Too quiet. The bodies of Gianluca's guards lay scattered through the halls, Alessandro's work, I suspected, clearing a path for me even as he claimed to stay behind. I found Gianluca in the master bedroom, standing at the window with a glass of wine in his hand. He didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, he looked almost amused. "The lost sister," he said, turning to face me. "I wondered when you would come. You knew about me. Enzo told me everything. The sister hidden by Dominic. The heir no one knew about. He thought the information would make him valuable." Gianluca smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "He was wrong. You used him. Corrupted him. Made him betray everyone who loved him. I gave him what he wanted, the chance to be someone other than Alessandro's shadow. Is it my fault he wasn't strong enough to survive the consequences?" My gun was in my hand before I consciously decided to draw it. Gianluca didn't flinch. He simply set down his wine glass and spread his arms wide. "Go ahead," he said. "Kill me. Add my blood to the river that flows through your family. It won't change anything. There will be another Gianluca. Another war. Another generation of death and suffering. This is what your world is. This is what you've chosen to become." "Maybe," I replied. "But you won't be here to see it." I pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the villa, and Gianluca crumpled to the floor. He wasn't dead immediately. The bullet had taken him in the shoulder, not the heart. I'd done that deliberately. I wanted him to feel what was coming. I walked toward him slowly, watching the fear finally bloom in his eyes. The arrogance had fled. The cold calculation had been replaced by something primal and terrified. My mother was murdered by someone who claimed to love her, I said, standing over him. My brother was corrupted by someone who promised him power. I grew up alone, abandoned, never knowing who I really was. And all of it, every bit of it, connects back to men like you. Men who think they can move people around like chess pieces. Men who believe that power gives them the right to destroy lives. Please, Gianluca gasped. That's what my mother said, probably. That's what Enzo said, at the end. Did you show them mercy? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The second shot was to the heart. Gianluca Vittorio died on the floor of his villa, surrounded by the ruins of his ambitions, killed by the sister he had never seen coming. I walked out of that villa as a different person than when I had entered. Not better, necessarily. But stronger. More certain. More at peace with the darkness that now lived inside me. Alessandro was waiting outside. He didn't ask questions. He just opened his arms, and I walked into them, and for the first time since that night in the bathroom, I let myself cry. The war was over. The Vittorio family was destroyed. And the Carvalho Empire, our empire now, stood stronger than ever. I never went back to my old life. The apartment, the 2 jobs, the constant struggle to survive, all of it faded into memory. My grandmother was moved to the best care facility in the country, and I visited her every week, holding her hand and telling her stories that carefully omitted the violence and the blood. Renata became something like a mother to me over time. I never fully forgave her. I don't think either of us expected me to, but I understood her. And understanding, I learned, was sometimes more valuable than forgiveness. Alessandro and I built something together. Not just a criminal empire, but a family. The kind of family neither of us had ever really had. We fought sometimes, disagreed often, but we never stopped protecting each other. Never stopped being the siblings we were meant to be all along. And every year, on the anniversary of my mother's death, I placed white lilies on her grave. Not to honor the lie of how she died, but to reclaim them. To make them mine. To remind myself that even the symbols of our darkest moments can be transformed into something beautiful. This is the story of how I washed a crime lord's blood and discovered I shared it. The story of how I walked into a nightmare and walked out a queen. The story of how I learned that family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people who see your darkness and choose to stay anyway. If you made it to the end of this story, I need to ask you something. This story took me so many hours to create, to research, to craft into something meaningful. All I'm asking for in return is one small action. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Just hit that button. It costs you nothing but a moment, and it means everything to creators like me who pour their hearts into these narratives. And if this story touched you, if it made you feel something, think something, question something, share it with one person who needs to hear it. Just one. That's all. Because stories like this deserve to be heard, and you have the power to make that happen. Until next time, remember, we are all just one choice away from becoming someone we never imagined. The question is whether that choice will lead us toward the light or drag us into the darkness. And sometimes, as I learned, the answer is both.